Welcome back to Converge. It is the end of July, early August. I want to welcome Dave Trier today. He's the vice president at ModelOp. We'll be discussing AI governance, which is a topic that I think many organizations in financial services and beyond are interested in improving and building a mindset around and developing a point of view around. So I think we're going to learn a lot here with Dave today. Dave, thanks for joining us. I guess to start, give us a little intro on who you are and what ModelOp does and some of your background. And then if you don't mind explaining a little bit about what AI governance really means, defining it for us, that would be a great place to start off.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And thanks for having me today. Dave Trier, VP of Product here at ModelOp. Spent the last 20 plus years with new technology, past 10 plus years in the model and AI governance space, mainly helping large enterprises to adopt and leverage AI and ML safely and effectively for their organization. And that's what we do here at ModelOp. That's the company I work for. We're a software company helping these large organizations to take advantage of AI at scale, responsibly and efficiently with the appropriate level of oversight. Now, Alex, you'd mentioned, so what does AI governance mean today? I'm glad you asked that because a lot of people think, especially in the corporate world, that governance is not necessarily a dirty word, meaning it's going to slow things down. It's going to grind things from a halt as it comes to new innovation. But really, what AI governance is and can be is an enabler of AI, because what it's trying to do, what it is set out to do, is not only just help to protect the organization, its customers, its employees, and any consumers, but it's also meant to provide a blueprint for how we can use AI effectively within the organization so that there's not any ambiguity, there's no lack of clarity around what we need to do. By having that in place, it actually becomes an enabler. Because before, it's often very, very hazy as to, well, I'm not sure what I need to do. Not sure who I need to talk to, what reviews need to be done, what audits there need to be in place. And that becomes something that is actually very slow, slows down the process, just where you have a proper AI governance in place with a proper blueprint, you know exactly what needs to be done. So in that way, it turns from something that's slow and manual and ad hoc to something that is known. We have all the paths and all the people involved at the right time, and it becomes an enabler for innovation.
Yeah, no, that's a great way of putting it. I guess to help our audience focus on their specific area of interest, why would AI governance be so mission critical and such a challenge for enterprise financial services or cross-border payments companies to adopt and approach? And in that specific sector, I know you've worked with financial services companies. What's your experience of the challenges that they face with enabling AI governance and approaching this strategic mindset?
Yeah, great question. So, first off, it's mission critical because AI must be used in order to keep competitive in the financial space, just period, right? If you're not using AI, you're going to start to fall behind from your peers and others that are in the market. So, AI itself is mission critical. Now, why AI governance is mission critical is because AI is very much a probabilistic, it is not a deterministic based approach. You're not sure exactly how it's going to provide outcomes, if you will. Rather, it's something that is very tied in with the data. It's tied into the models that you're using behind the scenes, and therefore it introduces risk. That's the main reason why AI governance is mission critical. It introduces risks. There's financial risks if AI goes wrong. There's potentially regulatory risks if something is audited, if you will. But there's also brand and reputational risks. If it gets out that you had some AI chatbot that started to give bad customer or consumer advice, then your brand starts to take a hit. So that's why AI governance is mission critical, is to account for and address and make sure you have the right plan in place to mitigate those risks.
And I know you guys at ModelOp recently published an AI governance benchmark report this year. What are the main reasons that you uncovered in the report that enterprises, I guess if you can also focus on financial services, are struggling to move AI initiatives from the ideation stage or the conceptual phase to the actual production and execution?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. It's very illuminating what was in that report, but not only in the report, just in our experience at ModelOp of what we've seen with these large enterprises, there's a couple of key challenges that they face that just slow down these AI initiatives moving from idea and into production. The first is, as I mentioned before somebody like a ModelOp, it's very manual, it's very ad hoc. They may have a documented policy, a documented AI governance policy, but there's no way to enforce that. There's no way to have all the appropriate pieces in place to go and do that effectively. So it's very slow. There's lots of back and forth across different teams. Oh, well, you forgot to do this particular review. Oh, you forgot to fill out this document. And so it's just very manual, ad hoc, and slow. And then it gets even worse because now in the past, there was really only kind of one type of technology. But with AI, there are tens, 50, hundreds of different technologies. So not only is the process manual and complex, and now you've introduced technology, a variety of different technology that itself is complex. So you got this, compounding problem of complex technical, if you will, as well as an undocumented manual process. So at the end of the day, it just slows down moving from I've got this great technology to, well, I want to use it because I've got all these barriers in place, technical barriers, process barriers, organizational barriers that just you don't have the right approach to make sure that you can overcome those very quickly.
So that makes total sense, and I guess that explains why your report highlighted that 80% of enterprises have at least 51 Gen AI use cases that are in that proposal phase, but only a few are actually in production. Is I mean, that gap is persistent, especially in regulated sectors like payments and financial services. Do you see that as a particular pain point, in these highly red taped regulated industries?
Yes, 100%.
Mm.
And that's because with these regulated industries, they're bound by law to go and do things like model reviews or validations, as they're called. They need to do risk scoring to understand what's the risk of these different models. So, yes, these regulated industries, again, by law, must do this, even within the US, where there's not a federal based law, so to speak, at this time. There are with the OCC, with the SEC, the Fed in general, there are regulatory concerns that each financial institution needs to comply with. And so, yes, that it's not only just traditional models, it's especially with AI models because of their, again, probabilistic nature.
And I know that, Alana can speak to this because we both are very frustrated with sort of the ad hoc, slow, manual nature of a lot of
Static
adoption of this.
policies and
Yeah,
things like that,
so take it
right?
away, Alana.
Yeah. Well, so, okay, in the report, when I read it, it says it takes 6 to 18 months to move a Gen AI project in from intake, right, to production.
Mhm.
What are the biggest contributors that you find, right, being in product, to this delay in fintech and payments?
Yep. So there's a couple big delays. First is, as I said at the outset, there's just not a blueprint in place. It's very manual. It's potentially documented, a lot of times not documented, but there's not a blueprint to say, here's all the steps, here's all the different players involved, different stakeholders across the different teams, and here's all the systems that need to be involved in the process. You have your data systems, your IT, your security, you have your validation and risk systems. So there isn't a blueprint that helps to define exactly what needs to be done. The second biggest delay is because there's not known what that blueprint or playbook is, that you get these teams that are either buying or building AI, and they get to a point where they say, all right, I'm ready to go. I want to hit the play button. I want to put it in production. And somebody comes out and says, whoa, 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 slow down. We haven't done this security review. And then you have to go through and figure out who to talk to. What do I need to do? What tests do I need to run? Oh, you didn't do your documentation. And for those that are in the AI world, you know how fun documentation is. That's another pain that just takes a while. So you get what you think to the finish line, and then you have to go back to the start line because you didn't do the proper reviews, the proper documentation, the proper security scans, etc. So what we find is that in especially financial services, they have to do those things. And so again, you get to the point where you want to use it, but then you have to go back to the starting line and go through all the mandatory steps in the process.
Right. Right. And yeah, because it's not like straight compliance, right? Where there's controls and then people have already ticked off all these controls and then they're operating within these controls. Now this is kind of like a net new world. And so with those existing systems, right,
Mhm.
that are really fragmented and or reliance on manual processes, say spreadsheets, emails, things like that, um, they're traditionally slowing down that AI governance, right, for organizations that are operating globally, even global payment providers. Can you kind of give us a little bit more detail around that? I know you kind of mentioned some of these fragmented systems, but what does it look like in practice, right? When you come in, right? How does the product or the process work to solve for those fragments?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, as you mentioned before, a lot of times this is emails and spreadsheets. And so, if you think about it, on average, for especially a large financial institution, there's around 50 to 100 steps that they have to go through from idea to actually being used. It's kind of crazy, right? But it's basically around 50 to 100 different steps, right? And so, if you think about trying to manage that with emails and spreadsheets, that's a nightmare, right? And it's even worse with AI. Why this is a really big problem in AI is that AI is constantly changing. It's not just I move from A to B and I'm done. Now you move to A to B and then you're back to A and constantly iterating. You update some models, you update how you're using it, etc. So think about it's painful enough to go through it one time with spreadsheets and emails, but imagine having to do updates every single week and you're going through that manual process every single week. So that's why AI governance in today's modern world cannot survive on spreadsheets and emails anymore because it's constantly changing, but also you're constantly have new technologies that come out. And that's where again, you just don't know, all right, well, I've got this new technology. Well, we've never seen that before. Go talk to Johnny. Johnny says, oh, we got to get a security view to go talk to Jane over there in compliance because we don't know what to do. Right. So you've got that compounding problem of the new technologies with the unknown process, as well as the very traditional spreadsheet based approach that makes everything manual with this is continuously updating and we need to continuously go through the process, right? So it's a compounding problem.
Yeah, it's like scale is just almost impossible, and then, kind
That's
of
right.
the old protocols, the old processes, right? The old ways don't open new doors, if you will.
That's exactly right.
Oh, that's interesting. Do you have any real world examples that you could share with us? Maybe a lot, say an 80% use case that people are trying to do and some of the obstacles that they are facing today that you help solve.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I just got off with a global financial institution, and one of the examples they gave where it stalled, right, was they had this AI system, and they thought they were doing everything right. They went and said, "Okay, I filled out my documentation. I got the risk team involved. They did their risk review, so I'm on schedule. I can get it out next week. Fantastic." Well, what they didn't realize was some of the data that they used. Yes, they looked at the data. It was confidential data, but they did the proper data security thing, so they thought they were good. But what they didn't realize is that inherently in that data, it got down to some very specific indicators of personas, meaning that you could
Ah,
de-identify the data. And because you
PII.
could de-identify the data, they had to do a very thorough data compliance review. So something that went from why I'm going to get it out in production next week went to stalled for 3 months because they had to do a very, again, data specific compliance review to make sure that that data would be de-identified to the point you could pick out, okay, this is Alana's data, right? So that's just
Mhm.
an example where, again, you thought you had everything right, you thought your manual process was okay, but you got to the point where, nope, indeed, you forgot to do a particular set of steps because of this data sensitivity nature,
Right.
if you will.
Interesting. So kind of like portions of the data say need to be anonymized before it's a good data set that you could, whatever, fabricate.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. I was just to pivot here for a minute. I was really shocked by the fact that only 14% of enterprises actually enforce what's called AI assurance. And can you confirm for me that what we mean by AI assurance is validating factual information is correct?
Yeah, so AI assurance is essentially making sure you're doing the appropriate testing, the appropriate oversight, and appropriate monitoring of how your AI is actually working, right? So this can be range from anything from making sure it's actually performing, making sure it's robust, making sure that it's stable for your users,
Okay.
especially if it's consumers and customers that are out there.
So only 14% of enterprises are enforcing this at the
I was
enterprise
just gonna
level?
say, wait, what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is this? I mean, what does that mean for
That means every like 85% are hallucinating?
yeah, what's the
Exactly.
ramification there?
Yeah, so let me give you an example of this. So pretty commonly, these AI systems that are out there, you have a system owner, right? Somebody that is developing and owning the AI system, right? And so financials, because they're regulated, of course they have to go and look at it. But most commonly, what happens is they look at it on the required basis, like once a month, once a quarter. So they will do that, right? Of course they'll do that, but they're not looking at it in between. And as you can imagine, with AI, it's constantly changing. It also can give you the different answer to the same question that you ask, right? So in the world of AI, that process of checking in once a month, it doesn't work anymore, right? So that's what we mean by only 14% are enforcing AI at the enterprise level, is that they are just leaving it to the system owners and model owners to do the right thing, as opposed to just having that enterprise level consistent way to do assurance, consistent way to report on how these are actually performing and within the bounds and thresholds that you had set.
Got it. Okay.
So,
Okay.
improvements to be done for sure.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Yeah. So, with other regulations like the EU AI Act and GDPR, varying requirements in global markets, how are leading financial services organizations adapting their governance frameworks this year, right now, in new ways that you'd like to share?
Yeah, so I think most large financials that, especially those that are doing business within the EU, there were specific compliance requirements for the EU AI Act that they had to identify which of those different AI systems are high risk systems. That's the first requirement by law to do business within the EU, is that you had to identify which ones were high risk systems and also unacceptable use. There were certain specific AI systems that are just not acceptable, meaning that you cannot use them. So that was really the first requirement, again, legally, that they had to comply with. And they had to identify which ones were high risk that were fit into a specific criteria. They had to catalog them into an inventory, if you will, and if they were ever asked that of course, they have to report back, "Yep, here's the inventory of the specific systems." Now, down the road, that part of the EU AI Act, but just all the regulations in general, there are some common themes. There's that risk tiering, like I mentioned. Is it a high risk or say low risk? There is the second thing, which is that you do some independent testing or validations, as most financials call it, just to have somebody go and test and make sure this thing is not going to be, ethically biased in any way. It's going to perform. It's going to be stable and robust. There is what I would consider the most important part, a proper risk management approach and capability to make sure that you're identifying any of the risks around using this AI system and making sure that you have the appropriate mitigating actions in place. So those are just a couple of the key components. There's obviously many others, but those are very commonly some of the key ingredients for regulations like the EU AI Act. There's similar ones within the states, within Canada, et cetera.
And when you're thinking about cross-border payment institutions or businesses doing business cross borders internationally, what are the challenges that are unique to those businesses compared to domestic focused corporations? Obviously, we live in a global world where more and more companies are going global, but what are some of the challenges most unique in cross-border?
Yeah, so I think what was interesting about the EU AI Act and several others that followed this is that it was stated that if you do business in the EU, you must comply, right? So for cross-border payments, as you just mentioned, if you're doing any sort of cross-border into the EU, doesn't matter if you're not headquartered there, you have to comply, right? So that's something that was really why the EUA Act was monumental in that it required you to do that sort of compliance, even if you're not headquartered or even do a lot of business in a certain, country within the EU.
Understood.
So, kind of when you're innovating, right? Say you are a fintech and, you're based in the US and you launch kind of a core product, but, it's focused on smaller businesses and you want to go more upstream and maybe there is, right? Like a cross-border use case, and now you're doing partnerships, and there's different ecosystems and integrations, right? Which is kind of the world I live in. Um, on that report, I noticed that 36% of enterprises have budgeted more than 1 million a year for AI governance software. But how are fintechs and cross-border payment providers balancing governance investments, right, with the pressure to innovate quickly, right? It's kind of like there is a second player advantage, but it's almost, you want to get to market faster, right? So, I mean, how are fintechs and cross-border payment providers balancing that, kind of need to hyperscale, need to innovate with the governance investments that you
Right.
find?
Yeah, and those are as traditionally opposing forces, right? You have governance, which is trying to it's not trying to slow things down, but in the past, it did slow things down with innovation where you're trying to move quickly, right? So those are typically in the past opposing forces. But
Yeah,
why
if
you
you want
see
to
them,
disrupt, right? If you
yeah,
I
right.
there's a disruptor use case here.
Right, right. And but that's where you see that in 2025, especially that these enterprises have budgeted substantial amount for AI governance software because they can no longer have those traditional methods that slow things down. They can't do that anymore because they need to innovate quickly. So this goes back to what we talked about earlier, where that manual approach, which slows things down to a halt, taking 9, 12, 18 months to get AI out the door, that's not possible anymore because they need the competitive differentiation. So they are spending money on this AI governance software to put a proper approach in place to get out of spreadsheets and emails into something that is automated, consistent, and scalable. By having that, again, automated, consistent, and scalable approach, it allows them to open up the floodgates for AI to the entire enterprise, say, go innovate quickly, stay within these bounds, stay within these guardrails, if you will, and again, the software will help you to do that, but go innovate. As long as
Mm.
you're moving through that process efficiently and quickly with the software, then you can go and again use AI for what you want to do to really drive that competitive advantage within your business area.
So, that being said, what do you think the minimum viable governance looks like, right? Can you describe that?
Right. Yeah. So this is a term that we've coined in ModelOp overall. It's a minimum viable governance. So think about in the world of product and minimum viable product, just having
Yes.
enough product out there, right? But in minimal viable governance, think about it as kind of the Goldilocks of governance. Just enough governance, not too much, but just enough in order to protect the organization, customers, and consumers. So to get started with minimum viable governance, it's about establishing first and foremost an understanding visibility, if you will, into the different AI systems. You can't govern what you don't see, right? So it's about establishing here are all the different AI systems that are out there across the different business units. Here's an understanding of the risk tier, as I mentioned before, is it high risk versus low risk? And then here is what the intended usage is. So even just starting there is a great way to start to establish this AI governance capability at scale. And then you move into introducing some of the automation to apply different controls, to do your risk mitigation. And then finally move into the third area, which is around proper ongoing enterprise AI assurance. Make sure you're constantly and continuously testing, monitoring, tying those back to the risks, et cetera.
Well, I'll give you a phrase, I'll coin you a new phrase then. That in between middle of the road that you described, that one can be, because there's MVP and MLP, right? So you can do minimal lovable governance too.
I love it.
I like it. That's great. So, as we look to the future, obviously huge projections for AI spending, 631 billion by 2028. Where do you see the greatest opportunities in those years ahead for financial services firms in differentiating themselves through governance? What are the real wins that they could leash in the future?
Yeah, I think you'll start to see this publicly. And what I mean by that is those fintechs and large financial enterprises that are starting to report on where they're using and getting value for their company, value for their customers with AI, those are the ones that are differentiating themselves with governance. And the reason I say that is that there's no way that they could get those out to market and publicly talk about them without the proper AI governance capability in place. So you're going to see those The winners in the space are the ones that are constantly evolving, they're constantly providing competitive differentiation through AI products or AI-based services. And those are the ones that have taken this message that we're talking about here to heart and put in the proper AI governance capability that's scalable, that actually helps to be that enabler and automate some of those processes so that they're rapidly getting new AI products and services out the door. So I think you're going to see that more publicly, Alex. And you can tell, you can take it from Dave, that they put something behind the scenes to make sure that that happens from a governance perspective.
Yeah, that makes total sense. What about like, the automation and the life cycle management of AI models, which are constantly being reborn? How will automation and life cycle management of these models change that risk profile for financial services and payments firms over the next 3 years, in your view?
Yeah, so this is the only way they get to scale. You have to use automation, right? There's just too many new technologies. The technologies are evolving all the time. You can't just keep throwing humans at reviews and the like overall. So you have to use automation of the process, automation of the life cycle, or life cycle management, as we call it, to make sure that anytime anybody within the firm or the organization has an idea, that you're automating the process. You're telling them what you need to do. You're taking care of tasks when that you can take care of it on their behalf, pulling in a human when you need a human. But automation is the key to go from, again, idea to actual usage. If you have that automation, if you have that lifecycle management, it does lower the risk of the use of AI because you have that consistent process. It's auditable. You can retrace its steps, and you can, as part of it, identify the risks related to it and make sure that you have mitigating actions thereof. And by doing so, again, you're able to open up AI, the floodgates of AI, to the large organization, knowing that you have this life cycle management that is protecting the organization, cataloging the risks, making sure that you know how you can actually address those risks should they come to fruition.
Yeah. Just to close out, Dave, this has been great, but I want to just sort of get the takeaways that businesses can action upon and leaders can think about as they contemplate their future with AI governance. So, what is your, I guess, top piece of advice or several pieces of advice for financial services leaders who are looking to set up their very first AI governance framework? And what's the single most important step they could take today to get started?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is, as we talked about, AI governance, you should be thought of as an enabler of innovation to get your products out the door faster. Second is, as we talked about with minimum viable governance, this is not a 5-year effort. You get started with just what you need at the right time from a governance perspective, and you iterate from there. So the advice I'd give to these financial services leaders is you don't need to think about this and continue to delay and delay and delay to the point where you are just using, again, the old methods of manual spreadsheets and emails and people, right? Put in the base foundation in place, that minimum viable governance foundation in place to start, and then you can iterate from there over time. In that way, you get all the benefits. You start to build the benefits of having that AI governance in place, but then you start to get the benefits of the automation, the scalability, the process improvements by just putting the foundation in place now.
Well said. Let's give Model Op the center stage for a moment. Tell us what's coming up next for Model Op that you're excited about that we should all be watching for, and then close out, if you don't mind. Just tell us where we can find that AI governance benchmark report that we cited throughout the conversation, and how we can get in touch with you, or how organizations can get in touch with Model Op for further guidance.
Great. Thank you so much, Alex. So, what's coming up next for ModelOp? Everything we've been focusing on is agentic AI, right? So, LLMs were all the rage with generative AI as part of that in the various chatbots, etc. But agentic AI is going to be transformational for many organizations where it starts to actually act. So, all our focus over the past 6 months has been being prepared to help organizations leverage agentic AI safely and also in a financially and fiscally responsible way, meaning that you go overboard with spending on LLMs and agentic AI. So not only are we helping to protect the organization from regulatory, financial, and other risks, but also helping them to optimize the cost around it. So again, our focus is around agentic AI with a heavy focus as well on the cost management and optimization, if you will.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to see where this goes and excited to follow your progress as a company. Thanks for joining us. I'm sure our listeners will have a lot to take away today. And thanks, Alana, for being my cohort here today. Dave, great to meet you again and hope to run into you at one of the industry show floor conferences or something like that.
Great. Thank you so much, Alex and Alana. It's a pleasure talking.
Likewise.
All the
Thanks.
best.